Let's bring in Derek Maltz, former DEA acting administrator and director of special operations, now senior vice president at Penlink. Derek, good to have you on the program. So it feels like the administration is broadening their war on drugs by including Colombia now. You could say it's a new front in the drug war. But Colombia's president is saying we're not doing anything wrong. Like these people weren't doing anything wrong. This was murder. What can you tell us about the threat that Colombia's drug trade poses to the U.S.?
So keep in mind, Aisha, that right now, last year, it was record amount of cocaine production in Colombia. I met, when I was the acting administrator, I met with the Director General of the Colombian National Police, and basically there's this huge threat, right? Cocaine production's out of control. So they are shipping that cocaine around the world, not just to the U.S., but around the world. And it's not even just a threat to our country, but once again, President Trump is helping keep the world safe, just like he's doing with the Middle East peace agreement. But what people have to understand is that we've never had any terrorist organizations, even if you combine al-Qaeda, ISIS, Hezbollah, killing this many Americans. So this president and this administration is using all tools of national power to go after the threat and go after them for what they deserve. I mean, millions of people, like over 1 million people have died from drugs over the last many years. The kids, the babies. I went to a rally on Saturday in D.C. We're wearing T-shirts with little babies that are dying. American public has to wake up, and I'm very impressed with the clear and decisive action by the Secretary of War and the White House and Secretary of State doing outstanding work to support the men and women of law enforcement that are on the streets every day in America, that are getting abused, that are getting threatened. So we have this whole of government approach, and actually we're on the right track. We got to keep going.
Well, Derek, let me ask you this really quickly here. We got a minute left. On this most recent strike, there were 2 survivors on this cartel boat. And President Trump announced that Marco Rubio was going to send them back to their home countries, Ecuador and Colombia, for prosecution. If these guys are terrorists, if these are the worst of the worst, like al-Qaeda, shouldn't we be prosecuting them?
Well, that's a great question. I don't have all the details of what was found on the boat, who these suspects are. But obviously, this administration has a lot of experience. And Secretary of State Rubio, as the president said, could be one of the best ever in the history of Secretary of States. I trust their judgment. And I know that law enforcement, because I was in the meetings, I know they're evaluating every case differently because that's what you have to do. And there's no 2 cases the same. So I have confidence in what they're doing. But the biggest success story is there's going to be accountability. If you're going to kill Americans, you're going to be held accountable. This isn't soft on crime anymore. All these vulnerabilities and weaknesses are going to be shut down. So thank you to this administration.
All right, Derek Maltz, thank you for joining us on this story. We'll have you back soon.
We're joined now by 2 people who've been digging into these No Kings protests. Azra Nomani, editor with The Pearl Project. Jason Rant, Seattle Red talk show host. Azra, let's start with you. Are these, protests simply, organic, people, emailing maybe on social media and so forth? So it all just came together, grassroots from the people?
Absolutely not. This is a protest industry. And so what I did is what I've learned to do in journalism, which is follow the money. And I established that there's 260 organizations that were behind this No Kings protest. And as Jenica Pounds, a computer scientist with Data Republican, said to me, they have built an empire, these left-wing organizations, using nonprofit status to use the machine that we have in America to wage a war, a political war on Donald Trump. And so everything was orchestrated. It was political theater from beginning to end, from social media. And the real question for people is the fact that these organizations we're living rent-free, basically tax-free in America, pulling off these protests.
Yeah, it seems like, Jason, there are hundreds of organizations behind these protests. It's not one particular organization, but it is like, I really think it's actually their social life. I don't know if because we don't have clubs, community civics organizations anymore, they think those are racist. I don't know. But this is as close to church as many, not all, but many of the protesters who showed up really have anymore.
Yeah, they don't believe in God, but they do believe in this kind of activism, and this is what they do professionally. And they're taking advantage of different tax codes like 501c4 status, which a lot of these organizations are. Those are supposed to be social welfare organizations, and they're allowed to get political, but they don't have to disclose their donor list, which is how all of this dark money ends up getting funneled here. I mean, in the case of No Kings, you have Indivisible, which is the primary organization behind it. It gets funding, however, from places like the George Soros Foundation, his Open Society foundations. They're getting that kind of money, and then they're getting institutional support from all of these other groups that Azra just pointed out. Everything from the mainstream stuff like the ACLU, but also to groups like the Communist Party of America, where they might not donate directly to Indivisible, but what they do is they share their contact list, or they reach out to their contact list, say, hey, show up at so-and-so for this event. And the money that they do end up spending, these groups in general, is for like signage, things like that, but also the professional activists who show up, who then use this to get more contact information for the people who show up and then solicit for funds for donations from them.
Yeah, Open Societies Foundation, by the way, gave us a statement saying, we support a wide range of independent organizations that work to deepen civic engagement through peaceful democratic participation. Our grantees make their own decisions about their work consistent with the law and the terms of their grant agreements. I don't think Azra, a lot of pro-life organizations that were truly fighting something noble, the slaughter of millions of babies in the womb. I don't think they got any money from George Soros. I certainly don't think parents groups that you helped launch years ago in Fairfax County, Virginia, I don't think they got any help. Only a particular ideology gets help from the Open Society Foundation.
Yeah, I mean, they are basically fueling the machine. And Jason mentioned the 501c4 organizations that are political organizations, allowed to do a limited amount. But according to my data analysis, about 100 of the organizations are 501c3. And they are supposed to do very little political work. They are absolutely supposed to be nonpartisan. But some of the names of these groups is literally resist Trump. That's not very subtle there. And then build the resistance, along with, as Jason was mentioning, the Party for Socialism and Liberation. They bring the foot soldiers to this movement and create this myth of the marching millions. And I want everybody to know that, this is theater. That's all it is.
Yeah.
But it's an industry, and it must be checked.
Well, Jason, finally, do you think, as Trump said, this in any way is representative of a wide swath of the American electorate?
I think he's correct in that it clearly isn't. I mean, I heard a lot of the language of this is what democracy looks like. No, democracy looks like the Electoral College map, where you had 77 million voters who voted for Donald Trump and 312 Electoral College votes. That's what democracy looks like. These are folks who are protesting democracy because they're upset that they lost the last election. And the good news is, despite a lot of people showing up, they're not really going to get anything done here.
Yeah, sour grapes didn't sound too good for a day of protest, so they just called it No Kings, because no one believes in that rally that Donald Trump is actually a monarch. It's the most ridiculous.
Let's bring in Jason Miller, former Trump campaign senior advisor, and Kevin Walling, former Biden 2020 campaign surrogate and partner at HG Creative. Thank you both, gentlemen, for joining me. Don't you miss the campaign trail?
We're heading into it. Two weeks out, I guess,
Also,
right?
not a boring mid-cycle
Exactly.
election whatsoever. It feels like, Kevin, every single day there is some new Democrat that has a problem. It's a problem for the party. It becomes a national news story. And now we got this guy in Maine running for Senate who said some pretty nasty things about cops, about white people in America. So what's going on here?
Certainly not helpful. My advice to anyone running, Republican or Democrat, is check what you've tweeted out in the past, even especially if it's just been in the last couple of years. Listen, we know threats of political violence have more than doubled in the last 5 years directed towards elected officials. Anyone running should set that example for the American people. We know how dangerous rhetoric in the hands of someone who is unstable can do real harm to real Americans. I wrote an op-ed after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, calling to tone down that rhetoric, that be a lesson for all of us. And we need to call it out on our side. I joined, Brett Baer the day of those Jay Jones text messages and called for him to come out of that race, to drop out. Democrats have a responsibility to call it out on our side. We can't just say this Democrat is. This Democrat certainly is.
Jason, I want to ask you about this because it's not just the politicians. It's trickling down to people. You had this dad at a football game, supposed to be there watching his son at the SMU game, was supposed to be watching his son play on the field. Instead, he's yelling at the gubernatorial candidate for the Republican Party in Virginia. He says, "Go back to Haiti." This is at Winsome Earl Sears. She's not from Haiti, by the way. Wasn't this supposed to be the party of good vibes and positivity and inclusion and all of that? What's going on here?
Well, I think the reality is that Democrats have lost their way as a party, and they don't know who they are, what they actually stand for. And the problem is that it's not just the rhetoric. The problem is it's manifesting itself with the way people act. We've seen these horrific acts of violence, whether it be what happened with Charlie Kirk's assassination or the attempted assassinations, both of them against President Trump. It's got to stop. And the fact that Democrat leaders have not called out the Jay Jones or even the Zohran Mamdani posing with a radical cleric who is the unindicted co-conspirator of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. I mean, these are some really outliers that I think the Democratic Party has to stand up and say something about, because if they don't, then people go out and take it to that next level. And it's really becoming a problem.
By the way, that was at JMU here in Virginia, not SMU. I want to read this memo that the DNC chair sent out to Democrats. It was very optimistic considering what we're watching here at some of these races. He said, Democrats are overperforming in key elections in warning sign for the GOP. Republicans know they're in trouble. That's why they're releasing faulty polls in contradiction with independent polling, lying about their opponents, and not campaigning with Donald Trump. Democrats, on the other hand, are in a strong position. Generic balloting for the 2026 midterms consistently shows Democrats ahead of their Republican counterparts. However, if you look at what's happening in Jersey, if we can pull this poll up, Mikey Sherrill is in a very tight race with Jack Ciattarelli right now. And it's interesting what's happening here because you can tell that Ken Martin is worried about this particular race.
Well, certainly, Democrats worry all the time until those ballots are counted. But I will point out, and what Ken says, Chairman Martin says in that piece, is in the last 40 special elections, Democrats have either won or overperformed in 39 of those elections. So we are incredibly hopeful, both in Virginia. We're going to flip the governor's mansion from Glenn Youngkin to Abigail Spanberger, and of course, hold on to that governor's mansion in Trenton, New Jersey with Mikey Sherrill. Our own Fox polling had her up even higher at 8 points. And again, let's also remember
these are supposed to be landslide victories for Democrats.
Not necessarily landslides. You know, her predecessor, the current governor of New Jersey, only won over Jack Ciattarelli by 3 points last cycle. So let's keep everything in perspective. It's gotten tighter. Certainly, Donald Trump is cutting in the margins of New Jersey. I grew up in New Jersey. It's almost kind of going to become more of a bellwether state. But I'm confident that Mikey Sherrill will win on Election Day, and so will Abigail Spanberger.
Jason, I got to ask you about that because you were on the trail with the president. I was there, too, in New Jersey as he was bringing out voters that had never voted for a Republican before. He made a lot of inroads with the Hispanic vote there in Democratic districts. Is that going to play for Ciattarelli?
Absolutely. And Ciattarelli's a good candidate. I think he's closing very strong with this race. So New Jersey, it will come down to the wire. I think in Virginia, I know who's definitely not going to win. That would be Jay Jones, a Democrat candidate for Attorney General, who, by the way, has completely disqualified himself. He wouldn't even pass a background check to have that position if he was going into law enforcement. Whether or not that will ultimately help Republicans win at the very top of the ticket for the gubernatorial side, we'll see how that comes together. But the one thing I will say is that keep in mind, as we round the corner into the midterms, voters still trust President Trump on the economy and to secure the border. As that starts to move back around, I feel good about the Republicans next year.
It's so interesting. I'm also so wildly fascinated by this New York mayoral race because it is getting close now. And people are saying that even if Curtis Sliwa, the Republican candidate, even if he drops out, it's still going to be a very